I'm your host, John Lane. I'm here with Anth, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Luke Edwards of The Telegraph and BBC. Luke, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start this really by asking kind of how does a young man who grows up supporting Leyton Orient, not in the northeast, end up here, settle down, following northeast football and not following it, but covering it
Yeah,
for national outlets. How did that all happen?
it's a long and winding road. So I was born in London, grew up in East London, Leyton Orient fan, which was my local team. So we're talking like the 80s, and crowd trouble was still a problem. So we went to where it was safer, really. That was probably what I think my dad wasn't from East London. He was actually a Leicester City fan, but adopted when we lived in Leyton and Leytonstone. He adopted Leyton Orient. So yeah, so I just all grew up a Leyton Orient fan, and then I started gradually moving northward. So we left London when I was 13. Moved to Ipswich for 3 years, where as people who maybe followed my career for a long time know, I went to school with Kieran Dyer. We played in the same football team, and then I moved to Sheffield. And I did my A levels in Sheffield, and then really it was universities that were 2 hours away. Effectively, I think that's kind of how I chose it. So it was Liverpool or Newcastle. Now, my mum's best friend had lived in Newcastle when we'd been little, and so I'd come up to the region quite a lot as a child, and this was mid-90s, so the Kevin Keegan. I was football mad, and there was something stirring at Newcastle. I still say Newcastle. I apologise for that, but I can't stop it. And it was. I think it had just been voted either 7th or 8th best party city. Now I was 18, football mad. Newcastle's 2 hours on the train from Sheffield. They had a really good history course at Newcastle University. And yeah, that was like the clincher, really. And then I just fell in love with the place. I mean, I think, as I say, coming up here as a child in the 80s, early 90s meant I had some sort of knowledge of it, but fell in love with it as a student. And then I meant to leave. I've got to be honest, I did mean to leave. I was going to go back down to London. I was kind of London obsessed then. I was a big clubber in those days, so for those of a certain vintage, I was in Shindig every weekend. But yeah, so I was going to leave, and then in those days, the Newcastle University student paper, the Courier, basically had like a feeder system into the Chronicle and the Journal. So I started doing work experience at the Journal when I was still at university, and then I was going to Australia for a year, and they offered me a job. And I thought, okay, great. I can come back and stay in a city that I know. And then again, I was going to leave when I'd sort of done my training period and kind of learnt the ropes a little bit. And this is where the romance comes in. I met a girl, and I was offered a job on the Mirror about 3-4 months after we met, down in London, and I turned it down because I wanted to see where this relationship with this girl went, and I felt that was more important. And we're married and have 2 kids. So yeah, and then I've never wanted to leave since, really. And my mum and dad have both moved up to Whitley Bay. So yeah, the kind of immediate family is only my brother now, who's down south, and cousins, etc. So it's very much my home. Very, very proud to call it my home. And I think it helps me in a way that, and this might be hard for people to believe, because I think I'm now synonymous with social media in particular as being Newcastle, that I just cover Newcastle. But actually at the Journal, when I was at the Journal for 11 years, I covered just as much Sunderland, and probably more Sunderland, actually. And I don't prefer one club or the other. I know I'm looking at you both, one with black and white stripes and one in red and white stripes in the background. I'm not just saying to ingratiate myself with you, but because I'm not from the region, I don't have that tribal loyalty. My wife is a Newcastle United fan. She's from a family of Newcastle United fans, but certainly in my 20s and 30s, when Sunderland were in the Premier League, it was Newcastle one week and Sunderland the next. And I can honestly say, handheld on heart, I didn't have a preference for either. And I actually find it incredibly sad that I don't go to Sunderland very often anymore, because that's a detriment to North East football. I used to go to Middlesbrough all the time as well. And yeah, I would love to see Sunderland and Middlesbrough both back up. And I honestly mean that. I don't prefer one club or the other. I just happen to live on Tyneside.
I mean, you're the second person to say that on our podcast. Stephen Caldwell was the first. So,
well, there you go.
So, and they are the two very special clubs for different reasons. Obviously, I've got an affinity with one, and Ant's got an affinity with the other.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, it's you're right. It does make it special. There is one thing that unites the two clubs, Luke, and I'm sorry to bring this up.
I know
There's
where
a
you're going.
certain manager that managed, first of all, Sunderland in the, I want to say, late noughties, early 2010s kind of era. I think it was 2010 he joined them. And then obviously he came to Newcastle in 2019, and that's Steve Bruce. He's not regarded well on either side of the Northeast divide, shall we say. What kind of job do you think he did at both clubs, in your kind of professional opinion as a sports journalist, and kind of what's your reasoning for that, really?
Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. Well, okay. Steve Bruce is a friend of mine. I think we all know that by now. And actually, we became friends when he was Sunderland manager. And again, when I still worked for the Journal, I was there all the time, and I got to know him. I'd be interested to bring Anth in on this, because I find it a bit more puzzling. I get the Newcastle stuff, I really do, but Sunderland. I mean, he was the last manager to get you a top 10 finish. That team that he had before he lost all the strikers, when Welbeck, Campbell, Jan all left, they were pretty good, weren't they?
We were decent. You're right, Luke. And yeah, I think it puzzles me, because when I used to go to the matches with my son, I think a lot were in his favour and supported him well and were quite vocal about it. I think he was accepted by a lot of the fan base. Now, obviously, results towards the end of his tenure weren't great, and obviously, I think the Wigan game was the big one, wasn't it, where the crowd were quite vocal. But I mean, from my viewpoint, where I used to sit with my son, we supported him, we backed him, and we looked at his previous managerial positions and how well he performed there as manager, and we did welcome him. Maybe not so much with open arms, certain support sort of branches and what have you, but but it was quite sad when he did leave. And I mean, he made a comment when he left. I've just done a bit of research, and he said, obviously being a Newcastle fan, as soon as it went a little bit pear-shaped, they couldn't wait to jump on the bandwagon. And I was like, I understand why he said that. And, the crowd towards the end were very vocal, because the results weren't going our way and the performances weren't great. But yeah, I mean, I quite liked him as manager, to be fair. And I thought he was an amiable chap, and he spoke well of the club, and I think he still does. And I just think it was just certain sections of the support that were obviously against him from the start, a bit like with Beale of recent times. We've discussed it a lot of them with John. So yeah, but he had us playing great football. He got us to mid-table, was it 10th and 12th mid-table finishes? So
yeah.
Modern day times, league place finishes. I applaud that.
I find it, I mean, there was that little bit of rewriting the history, I think, from his part. I will say that, because again, I was covering the club, and there wasn't any animosity towards him. I was away in pre-season, but they were in Portugal, I think, and the fans were very good to him then. Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of expectation reality thing, isn't it? He got them 10th and 12th, and then the club wanted to kick on, and they started going backwards, and managers lose their job. It happens. I mean, the history of Sunderland in the 20-odd years that I've been covering North East football is a churn of managers. I'm trying to think who the longest serving was. Probably Mick McCarthy, I think, was probably the longest serving. And then we all know what happened after that with, O'Neill, and then, oh God, I forgot who came next. Di Canio. Poyet. So there were a few. And I thought he did do a good job at Sunderland. So I've always found it a little bit strange, but I think he didn't help himself by doing that. They hated me because I was a Geordie, because that wasn't actually the case. Yes, there were, I can swear on this podcast, can't I? There were you fat Geordie bastard songs at the chants at the end. And I think that hurt him. And he's a funny character, Steve, in that way, because he has got a thick skin in many respects, but I also think he takes things to heart. And I think one of the stories he always told me, was that his mum and dad came to watch a game at Sunderland, and they never came again. But I think that happened in the first season. I don't think it was anything to do with the abuse. It might have been caught up a little bit. His mum might have still come in, but his dad wouldn't come because he found it too stressful. So I think that probably hurt him a little bit. Now, I think he did a pretty good job at Sunderland when in the context. I'm going to say that. You're going to say, John, aren't you? But then at Newcastle, told him not to take the job. I've said it many, many times. It was a hide into nothing. You're replacing Rafa Benitez, who had the fans eating out the palm of his hand, didn't he? A very unpopular owner and a very, very popular manager who played the political game brilliantly. And when Rafa was there, when the team lost, it was the players' fault. And when the team won, it was always the manager's brilliance that did it. When Steve Bruce came in, we're talking lockdown football as well, it was completely flipped. Whenever the team won, it was because the players won. Whenever the team lost, it's because the manager was hopeless. And I thought there was a little bit of injustice there. He was my friend. I told him not to take the job. Alan Shearer told him not to take the job. I knew he was going to be unpopular. I knew it was going to be an uphill battle for him. It's a pretty uninspiring choice to be manager. He was manager of Sheffield Wednesday at the time. They'd just got Rafa Benitez from Real Madrid and they'd just poached Steve Bruce from Sheffield Wednesday. But he took a job when he didn't have a pre-season, when very few people wanted it because it was so toxic and because they knew they'd be taking over from Rafa Benitez. And he had, for want of a better word, the balls to go in there and say, it's my club. I've always wanted the job, and he had. I know he'd wanted it for years and years and years. He turned it down twice before when he'd been at Birmingham to replace Bobby Robson, and he just felt he couldn't turn it down. And fair enough. And then what happened was, as I thought, there was a lot of negativity from the start. People, a good probably 75-80% of the fan base were willing to give him a chance, if I'm honest. And it only really became incredibly toxic in the second season. I can remember. In the first season, lockdown was pretty grim times, wasn't it? And there was negativity, but it was mainly consigned to social media, if I'm honest. And I started arguing with people on social media about it. I got my hackles up because I was defending my friend, but in a professional capacity, I was defending somebody who was doing basically as well, apart from one Alan Pardew season, as any manager had done under Mike Ashley. Now, when he came in, he lost Rondon and he lost Perez, which was 2/3 of the team's goals. He had Joe Linton as a number 9. I love Joe Linton. I always loved him, even when he was rubbish, but he wasn't the centre forward and he cost £40 million. He had Alan St. Maximum, and thank God they had St. Maximum in those 2 years. But I think he did about as well as any manager had done under Mike Ashley. You go through all of the managers. They were all bottom half. Best they could hope for was a mid-table finish. The difference was this perception between Rafa Benitez, the genius, who got the fans, who loved the fans, whipped them all up and was the brilliant politician. Very, very good at diverting blame elsewhere. And Steve came into that. But for 2 years, I think he did okay. And I told him again in that summer, the summer they signed Joe Willock, I said to him at the end of that season, I would step away now because the fans are coming back into the stadium. They've had enough of you. It doesn't matter what you do. It really doesn't matter. As soon as you lose a game, they're going to be on you. And he wouldn't quit. What I will say again in his defence, and people will be screaming, I'm sure, listening to this, is that he kept them up. He kept them up for 2 years, and the takeover happened because they were a Premier League entity and he kept them up. And it was time for him to go in that summer. He held on. Why did he hold on? Well, managers don't resign, do they? And I think we all know that he was fairly handsomely recuperated for the abuse he took. It was a difficult time, I think, for everybody, that 2.5 years, the takeover talk, lockdown. He was a lightning rod for all of that toxicity there was towards Mike Ashley. He was seen as Mike Ashley's man. I still think, I will argue to my dying day, that he did about as well as anybody. And for 2 years, he had an identical record to Rafa Benitez, but one was seen as a legend and one was seen as absolutely hopeless, tactically inept cabbage head, as the infamous quote goes.
I think, what I would just say to that, Luke, is I think in terms of you said that it was an uninspiring appointment, and I think for me that was my issue when he was appointed, wasn't the fact that he took the job, because if you're offered the job as a football manager in, you know, if you're in the Championship and someone in the Premier League says, "We want you to come and manage the club," and it's your boyhood club, why doesn't he take that job? Of course, he's going to take it. Like you can totally see all of that. I think the issue was for me at the time, it was more the fact that that was the way the club was going. So I was more pissed off at the club because it felt like a massive drop from where we'd been. But I mean, I think, look, it goes back to the reason Bruce isn't liked is because he's seen as an Ashley yes man. It's the same reason Pardew is not universally liked necessarily, despite the fact he talks very positively about Newcastle now. At the time, he was Ashley's yes man.
With the toxicity towards Pardew, he's the only manager I've ever seen, if you remember the Cardiff game.
Oh yeah,
where they were winning and he was booed and jeered every time he stood on the dugout and stood on the touchline, and he hid in the dugout. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, you can't forget that.
How he survived that.
Well, he survived because of Mike Ashley, because Mike Ashley didn't want to sack him, because all Mike Ashley wanted Alan Pardew to do was keep them in the Premier League, and he did that.
Yeah, it's mad. It's absolutely mad. Thank you for talking on your favourite subject. I do appreciate it.
It's not my favourite subject. I'm very.
I know.
I do get asked about it a lot, and as I said, I will defend those 2 years. It was time for him to go. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
And again, to go back to Sunderland, because there'd be some. I think history. I don't think it's been as kind as maybe it could have been to Steve Bruce. I think there is still a bit of animosity towards him from Sunderland supporters, and if you think of what's happened since. They weren't bad years, actually, when he was in charge.
Yeah, you're right.
He was a very good appointment at the time as well, Luke, I think, because given kind of what he'd achieved at Wigan as well, I think
it was a great job.
It was a good move, wasn't it? And
brilliant job.
You looked at it and you thought, actually, yeah, that makes sense. And I think when a club starts to churn managers the way that Sunderland did at that point, the issue probably isn't the manager. There's probably another issue going on. So let's slide into Sunderland then, and what's kind of going on with their managerial situation, because this seems crazy that we are on the 18th of June, 7:15 at night, and we still haven't got a Sunderland manager going into next year. Now they got rid of Beale February, March time. So
yeah,
I mean, what's going on here, Luke? It seems mad.
Well, I think it's the Emperor's New Clothes syndrome at Sunderland a little bit, isn't it? Look, we had the Metford Donald years, the misery of League One, lowest point in the club's history, properly miserable. I mean, Newcastle have had some bad times and been in the Championship, and they had the Ashley years, but nothing compared to what as low as Sunderland went. Absolutely brilliant. They got out of the division. I was at Wembley for that game. Great occasion, great day. Absolutely loved it. Just as I was at Wembley for the Carabao Cup final against Manchester City. And I think the first alarm bells for me was Alex Neil basically saying at the end of that, I'm not sure. He was very lukewarm on his future at the club. Even then, he came in and got them promoted, and I think he could see the direction of travel. That they had a director of football and Speakman who fancies himself. I use a phrase, reinvented the wheel. I think he's a man who believes that he's cracked the code, the enigma code of football. He really hasn't. And Alex Neil went, and I think he didn't exactly do a good job at Stoke, so they got away with that one, and everyone thought, okay. They then stumbled upon Tony Mowbray, one of the great sort of, he's not quite a Bobby Robson figure, but within football, he's universally liked, admired, respected, commands huge respect. Brilliant captain, very, very good manager. And wow, what a job he did with the kind of remnants of that League One team. And a few exciting youngsters, obviously Diallo on loan from Manchester United was a big factor. Did brilliantly, and so we weren't looking at what was going on in the boardroom. We weren't looking at the way the club was being run off the pitch, because all football fans and journalists are fundamentally the same. We're looking at results. Now, nobody expected them to get into the playoffs, and it looked to me that they probably felt pretty smug on themselves at that point. And Mowbray gets them to the playoff semi-final. They would have got to the final if they hadn't lost all their centre backs. They couldn't deal with that sort of direct approach from Luton. If you remember, they had that huge injury crisis. And then again, alarm bell rings when Tony Mowbray, after they lose that playoff semi-final, basically says he's not sure if he's going to stay. Now, that's two managers at the height of doing something well who have basically publicly challenged the board. Now, Mowbray was so strong, so powerful, because he was loved by the media, loved by the supporters. But what is clear now is he wasn't loved by the board. He wasn't loved by the owner, and he wasn't loved by the director of football. And that's because he was challenging them. And he effectively was saying to them, look, we've come close this season, but if you want to go up, we need this, this, and this. And that meant experienced players, players he knew, players who knew the championship. They went, no. That's not our model. And I know that for Sunderland fans, the model has become a bit of a swear word. But no, we're going to go and get all these young players from across Europe. We're going to nurture them. That's what you've been brought in to do. And then we're going to sell them for a profit. It sounds simple. It sounds brilliant. It sounds genius. Everybody's trying to do it. It's a model that Ajax do. It's a model that Dortmund do. But they're shopping in Waitrose. Sunderland are shopping in Lidl. Like they're going around Europe, second-tier teams. Not the top, not the elite clubs. They're not getting the elite level talent because they can't. They're a championship club. And it all just fell apart. And it was very, very sad. I think Mowbray was, again, a bit like Bruce. He was just waiting to be sacked, really. And it was horrible to watch because you knew they were waiting to do it. He'd publicly called them out in the summer. They couldn't do it because they're so conscious of a backlash from the supporters that they waited until results were acceptable for them to pull the trigger in the name of ambition and elite. What's the phrase? Elite work culture or something bollocks like that. Some fucking buzzword that they use. And then it's all unravelled, isn't it? Because the people who masked their deficiencies running the club, Alex Neil, Tony Mowbray, they're gone. They then bring in Michael Beale, and Michael Beale ends up doing exactly the same thing after a few weeks as Tony Mowbray had done, saying, we haven't got a centre forward. You've signed a load of youngsters. We've got Ukrainians who don't speak a word of English. I can't, if you want to go up, I need to add this type of player, experienced players who know the championship. Didn't want to do it. They thought they knew better. And then to write off a season, to replace Mowbray, then Beale, in the same season, where were they when they sat Mowbray? With just outside the playoffs, weren't they? 3 points outside the playoffs. Still very much in with a promotion hunt. And then all the experienced players go. They're left with a load of kids. And I love Sunderland to bits. I love, but like Newcastle and Sunderland, if that football club, that crowd can chew you up and spit you out if you're an experienced player and things are going badly. For those kids, wow. Like, to try and expect them to perform. And then, sure enough, we're told they know what they're doing. Well, I don't think they do know what they're doing. I'm going to be brutally honest. I don't think they do know what they're doing. And I think the curtain has been pulled back now, and we're seeing that. Is it a third of a year now without a permanent head coach? If whoever comes into that job now, we are all going to know they were not first choice. They probably weren't second choice. They're probably not third choice. Now, they might go on to be brilliant. They might go on to be a huge success, and they might stumble upon this head coach who can gel a team of young kids from all over Europe together and win promotion. I don't see that happening, and I think it could turn very, very ugly next season. And I actually feel I feel sorry for the players there. I feel sorry for the supporters as well, who've been patient. They've given them the benefit of the doubt all the way through this. I just think if they get off to a bad start next season, it's a tinderbox that's going to ignite.
I totally agree with everything that you've just said there. And I just think this whole managerial search now is a bit of a circus, and there's a massive backlash online, supporter forums, etc. There's obviously lots going on behind the scenes, but it was the deafening silence. I know that he's obviously made a public announcement and he's addressed the supporters' sort of worries as such by saying a managerial appointment is imminent, but I don't know what his definition of imminent is, because it's been a long, long time now. It's been 100 and odd days. I'm looking at the names being bandied around now. The Sunderland Echo had 33 names in total, and top of the list at the moment is a 4-1 shot. Didier Digard, who's OGC Nice manager. Now, no disrespect to my football team, who I love dearly. Born and bred in Roker, student at Roker Park. My son's a Sunderland supporter, but why would you, if your team finished 5th in the French league, join Sunderland at this particular moment in time? Like you said, it could be a powder keg next season, Luke. So, yeah, the managerial search goes on, doesn't it?
It's a brave man who takes it. That's not to say it should be. It should be one of the most attractive jobs outside of Premier League football in England. And they've spent a third of a year trying to persuade someone to take it. If that doesn't tell you something's wrong with how they're doing things, what the parameters of that jobs are, who's in charge of recruitment, what the recruitment strategy is. Will Steele was the first choice. We kind of knew that they wanted him, in the middle of last season when they appointed Beale. To then not get him because we're led to believe he wasn't happy about the way those things I've just mentioned about bringing in his own staff and what the budget was going to be and who he could sign. It's a huge problem, and it doesn't mean they can't turn it around. But my worry is, much like Mike Ashley at Newcastle, they've shown us who they are and how they want to do things now. Are they really going to change? Are they really wedded to this model? Have they got the bravery, the honesty, and basically the intelligence to realize, okay, maybe we need to adapt, maybe we need to compromise? I don't think they can do that. I haven't seen any evidence so far that they're willing to do that. And it's a worrying time, I think, for Sunderland because of that. That's not to say they might have a brilliant season. They might get momentum. They might let the new manager bring in. But, what's going on with recruitment now? This is when recruitment decisions are supposedly made. We know that the new head coach isn't going to have charge of recruitment, but surely he would want to have an input. So it's really, 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 really troubling for me. And I don't think it's the right way to run a football club, quite frankly.
Speaking of not the right way to run football clubs, you were talking about kind of the model, and it brought me back to almost when Lambias and Ashley thought they'd cracked it with their 11 purple players and all of that stuff,
Yeah, and cracking the French market, and they did for 12 months, 18 months. They spotted that the French players were paid peanuts in France, went and gone and signed the best players. But then everybody started doing it. Now, Sunderland are trying to do something that pretty much every club outside of the big 5 leagues in Europe is trying to do for a start. And most of the clubs on the bottom half of the big 5 leagues in Europe are trying to do, which is sign young players, nurture them, grow them, get 2 or 3 good years out of them, then sell them for a huge profit and invest it in the team. And it's very, very hard to get right. And I just don't think that's the conditions for a championship promotion winning team.
No, you need some experience in there. Look, and I think we've said this a few times, haven't we, Anth, over the last 6 months, that really what Sunderland need is they need a couple of experienced heads, probably one of them to be a number 9. If you look at Kiefer Moore, who, was talked about potentially moving to Sunderland in January, and he's been promoted with Ipswich, so someone knew what they were doing somewhere. So yeah, it's one of those, isn't it? They need to be a little bit more flexible with the model. I think it sounds amazing, as you say, if it could work, but when every club's trying to do it, it's very hard.
And if you've had managers who've told you that you can't, it's wrong, and that they need this, and that's 3 managers, Neil, Mowbray, and Beale, who all said the same thing, and they haven't done it. They haven't listened to those head coaches.
That's it. Absolutely. So let's move over to the black and white side. So decent summer for Newcastle so far. Nice light show down at the Quayside. had a big kit launch. We've also got Lloyd Kelly through the door as well. And the noises around recruitment seem promising. Luke, like from what I can hear.
Yeah. Go on.
What do you top 4 next season? What do we think?
I mean, so much is good. It's very early. What are we? Mid-June. They've signed a player on a free transfer. Kelly's clever. I think it's an astute piece of business. It's certainly an upgrade on Paul Dummett. If you're looking at the basis of what Newcastle need to do, they need to improve their squad depth. He certainly does that straight away. But they also need to improve their first team. I mean, I've said this before on stage at Talkins, but I think you're looking now at the Premier League as it used to be a big 6. It's now a big 8 with Villa and Newcastle. So that is 8 teams who are all competing for Champions League football. So most of those clubs are richer, despite the wealth of Newcastle's owners. They have far larger turnovers. They have bigger and deeper squads as things stand. They can pay more wages. They can cream off the elite players. So Newcastle are in that difficult position of trying to make that leap. They've had a taste of Champions League football, but I think top 8 is a par finish for them. Even again next season, that might be more difficult for Eddie Howe selling that to people, but I think that is the reality of the situation they are. But without Europe, and the fact that they're not going to have that same fixture congestion, I mean, I think European Conference League would have been great for them because they could have rotated and given players game time, but they've got a good chance. I will be very, very happy with a top 6. I think they have to be in Europe next season. I think whether the Champions League, I don't know. I mean, Chelsea are going to be, the great unknowns, aren't there? Liverpool. It's all unknown at this stage, but there are 8 teams, like I said. I would be wary of saying they have to get top 4. Very, very wary. But I do think they need to get into Europe, and I hope they're going to get one more season out of Bruno. That seems to be the sort of mood music we're hearing. Nobody thinks he's worth 100 million. People might try their luck later in the window. It's going to go right up. You're going to have to get used to the rumours until September the 1st because it's not going to go away. I think clubs will try and unsettle him. I think they might try and unsettle Isak, but I think Newcastle, as long as nobody activates his release clause, I don't think they will sell. And I don't think Bruno will agitate to leave. So I think they'll get another 12 months. With that in mind, that sort of keeps a ticking clock, really, doesn't it? In that they need to be back in Europe to keep their best players. I think those players can stomach 1 year out and maybe try and attack, win one of the domestic cup competitions. That will be the priority next season. So I think top 6 finish and long runs in the cups, hopefully get to a cup final, hopefully win the longest and most infamous trophy drought in English football. That will be the aims, but it's a long way to go. And John, it's difficult summer. They can't compete for the really elite tier players. They've got to see how things fall elsewhere. You've seen it with the Elise thing, haven't you? There's about 4 or 5 clubs in for Elise. It's great that Newcastle are one of them. We all knew he was pretty high up on their wanted list. But they've so far expressed an interest. That's all they've done. And I think they believe that he will be offered far more money by one of the other clubs going for him. That's the problem they've got. So they've still got to try and find an Isak. They've got to try and find a Bruno. They've got to try and find a Botman who aren't actually wanted by those elite teams. So that will be the challenge. But they need a right winger. That's the obvious upgrade. I suspect they'll do something like they did with Tonali, in that they will spend a huge chunk of money on a right winger, then see who they can sell and what they can do elsewhere. But I think they need another striker to replace Wilson. I think they definitely need that right winger. If Longstaff goes, they probably need another central midfield player. They need a right-sided centre-back. There's a lot to do. So ask me again if I come back on in September. I might give you a better prediction of where they're going to finish.
We'll definitely have you back on, Luke. Absolutely. No, I think in terms of it's interesting you say about the Elise stuff. I think what the Elise thing shows you is that they're prepared to spend some decent money in that area, as you say, because otherwise you're not even in that conversation or even trying to have it. It kind of, but it does feel like, kind of like almost like Madison or Szoboszlai. Like these aren't deals that I think realistically we can do, but they're deals that, there's links there, but there's links there for good reason. And I think there's a lot of potential options there in that position. And yeah, that's the key one. But in terms of next year, and we've got less fixtures, but there's 8 teams. I think it'll be interesting to see how Villa do next year with the expanded Champions League, though they're not going to have 6 fixtures like Newcastle had to deal with last year because of the nature of the new format and everything else. But I suppose, how do I follow up? What's my last question on this? Is if Eddie Howe doesn't get European football next year, either through winning a trophy or finishing in the top 6, do we think potentially that could be, PIF looking at other options in that area? I mean, I'm not advocating that, Luke. I'm a massive fan of his, and I know you are as well. But I suppose that would be my question: is European almost like European qualification essential next year to keep those ambitions lofty?
I think they will want Europe, but I think they have to be very, very careful. I think Newcastle are in a very delicate position in terms of they've had forward momentum since the takeover. They've ridden the crest of the wave. If I can bring Sunderland back into it, Sunderland had that momentum when they got out of League One and they're flying the Championship, and then you replace the manager. I think Howe has protected the regime a little bit, actually, last season, because they didn't do enough. They didn't sign anyone in January. Their summer transfer business, if you lose Tonali, it wasn't particularly inspiring. It was building for the future rather than the present. So they sent him into the Champions League war with a water pistol, really, if you think about it. But they were still competitive. I would be very wary. I think the outside noise will definitely increase because, again, there's this pressure of expectation. Newcastle owner has said they want to be number one, but they're not putting the money in. They can't put the money in to do it. So it's a very slow and gradual progress. I think what will be interesting is that first splurge that they had in January 21, is that right? Or January 22? When did they say? Oh, no, 22. Yeah, January 22.
January 22, yeah.
That will start to be off the books soon in terms of PSR. So they will free up more money to start investing. So I think they will want to see signs of progress. They certainly won't want to see a decline. I think if he goes into decline territory, if they're 10th, 11th, February, March, and not capable of qualifying for Europe, then they'll have that decision to make. I don't think I think the sort of universal feeling, and this includes the Saudi Arabian element, is that Howe's there for the long term, and they will shield him from any blame. But look, the fans haven't even been close to turning, so that always changes boardroom decisions when fans turn. I think he's got enough credit in the bank. I think he had to finish last season well, though, because otherwise I think he'd have started the season under a huge amount of pressure. But yeah, I think that it's just a big summer. I will know more when I see what they've done with the squad, because if he has that roughly the same squad as he's got this year, I'm afraid it's only 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th again next season, and 6th will be a really, really good season. So we will see what we're made of, and we want answers on lots of things, John. We want answers on the stadium. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of, oh yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then rowing back and saying, oh no, we've not made a decision yet. Well, they had made a decision. I think they have made a decision. They're going to stay at St James's Park, but the difference between what they're saying privately and what they're saying publicly, what they're saying to fans forums, just makes me a little bit concerned. And that's going to be an expensive piece of construction. Where's the money? Where's the training ground? These aren't things that are PSR related. I think as we move into the 3rd year of the takeover, I'm going to start wanting answers to those sorts of questions. Where's the money?
Makes sense. Luke, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really, really enjoyable. Everyone for listening, watching, thank you so much for doing so. If you've liked the video, please press the like button to say that you did. We do welcome your feedback as well, so please leave us all your comments on YouTube, but also on our social media platforms, which are at Instagram and X at Northeast Divide. Thank you very much, and goodbye.